Welcome to the Conscious Economics Podcast. I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind. I'm a serial entrepreneur and social innovator. I like to gather people from all different walks to talk about what I call the conscious economy. I believe that we can create a more equitable system, one that honors the well-being of people, the well-being of the planet, the well-being of business, and includes art and creativity. Join us each week as we tackle a different intersection of this big but critical conversation. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Conscious Economics Podcast. Today, we are activating our planet pillar again, and we are joined with Angelina Cristinzo, who is a permaculture designer and educator. She also is on the board of the Rural Urban Learning Association, which is a deep friend of Conscious Economics. And so we're so excited to have you here today to really teach our listeners about your world of permaculture, design, sustainable agriculture. It's kind of all the same thing.
Yeah,
you're going to explain.
Definitely.
Okay, awesome. So for anyone who's just tuning in for the first time, I'm your host, Rhiannon Rosalind, and we are just so excited to get into this conversation today. So the first thing that I'd really love to know, Angelina, is just where does this passion come from in you? Because it kind of intimidates me a little bit. You seem to know so much, and I just want to know where this was born in you and then where this love for sustainable agriculture has taken you.
No, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. You really are an inspiration. And just to answer the question, oh my goodness. Just to answer the question of kind of what started it, it really began as a child. My love for nature and the outdoors. And my grandparents helped raise me, and they kind of had this forested area behind them. And I grew up in there every single day, just climbing trees. They're the ones who taught me bird songs and how to identify wildflowers. And I didn't realize at that time, but that was my foundational basis for this love that I began to have. Then as long as I can remember, my dad always had me in our family garden. We also had like a farm growing up. So I was watering and planting.
Wow.
And yeah, he really was the one that taught me that if you take care of the earth, it's going to take care of you. Even further, my mom is a nutritionist as well. Yeah, so I've always had that connection to food and wellness and sort of like the holistic understanding of you really are what you eat.
Yes.
So it influenced my understanding of regenerative practices and organic farming and kind of what that meant to be in connection to the earth. And from there, I kind of became passionate about climate solutions and the climate crisis. As I was younger, I just became more and more concerned and aware what was going on. And I went on to do my undergrad in environmental and indigenous studies. And I remember feeling so hopeless and really scared for our future. And I had to ask myself, kind of what was my role going to be? What can I do in contributing to trying to solve the issues that we're facing today, which can be very, very overwhelming.
Daunting, yeah.
And then I went and did my master's in permaculture and looking at regenerative practices as a climate solution. And I remember learning about permaculture and thinking, wow, like something just clicked inside of my head. And I realized the first time in a really, really long time, I began to feel really hopeful.
Yeah.
I recognized it as like a holistic solution as well. Like permaculture wasn't just about growing food. It was about changing the way we see ourselves in relation to everything that's around us. So I felt that that was a really meaningful way to go about addressing the climate crisis that we're in.
I love that so much. And just from my perspective, obviously, I got to meet you because we both serve as part of the Rural Urban Learning Association. Yes. And when I first met you, you were this, quiet, quiet woman who I didn't really know much about. And then I remember for the first time that I saw some of your work, that I actually saw some of your designs, and I thought, wow, like this is such a fascinating leader, conscious leader, but also this whole world of permaculture to me was still something that I was just learning about. So for those that are listening right now that may not have heard that term permaculture, what does that really mean? And can you kind of walk us into that world?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So permaculture, kind of simply put, it's living in alignment with Earth's natural systems. So it's really recognizing that symbiotic relationship that is already present in natural ecosystems, and kind of it's a rewilding and a relearning as humans to go back to that kind of way of thinking and understanding. But fundamentally, permaculture is a design approach. It's an ecologically informed design approach that, again, reflects that symbiotic relationship. But even more, it really is an ethical framework. It's a worldview, and it really does have that paradigm shifting potential, because we're rewriting the narrative. We're changing that understanding that right now humans are kind of at the pinnacle of existence, and nature is here to serve us. And our relationship right now is it's exploitive. It's not recognizing the intrinsic value that natural systems have outside of the benefit that they give to humans. So how incredible is it that through permaculture, we're able to reimagine what our role is and to reconnect and to have a two-way relationship, which I think is just, it's so pivotal. That's why permaculture has that paradigm shifting potential, because not only is it about designing something that's in alignment with natural systems, but it's also changing the way that we think about ourselves.
100%. And I think sometimes, you know, I've talked about this a lot on the show, that the climate crisis is very daunting and overwhelming, as you said. And I think there's so many different layers to what people are struggling with right now within our system, that sometimes people feel helpless. And so they kind of buckle under that and just kind of keep perpetuating the same old same. And it's so exciting to see a generation of conscious leaders that, despite the daunting nature of what is before us, continue to create from the heart space and develop these new ideas of living and working. And a lot of them aren't new, they're ancient. And so I do want to just touch on, you mentioned that you also kind of combine this with Indigenous studies. Can you tell us a little bit about why understanding permaculture design could help towards reconciliation?
Oh, absolutely. To me, they are one and the same. We cannot heal the land until we begin to heal our relationships with not only people, but with ourselves as well. It is so relational. And as a white settler, I really had to think about what that meant for me, and to think about what that means as a treaty person even further. And especially when I'm building connection to the land, how can you not recognize whose land that we're on? So learning about the ancestral lands, learning about what treaty you're even under, and recognizing that in order to heal what's going on in the world, we need to heal the injustices. So it's not just about the planet or just about the environment, but it's also about, again, that equity and the interconnectivity. I learned about Indigenous worldviews, and especially where we are today, I had a lot of Anishinaabe teachers that really changed my perspective. I also, as part of my studies, learned how to speak Anishinaabe It was it was absolutely it was incredible, because I didn't even realize that within our English language, we're perpetuating this like separate ideals over and over again, just in the way that we speak. So learning a different language made me realize that the way that people speak is so intrinsically connected to the land that you cannot separate language. You cannot separate it from worldviews or from traditional knowledge systems or from the way that ideas are shared with one another. So the practice of permaculture, you need to realize that it is not just some new idea. And this phrase was not just coined in 1970, I think, by Bill Morrison. Like this is a way of thinking and understanding and relating that has been around for generations and generations. And especially when people are Indigenous to place, they have such a deep and intimate connection to a place that they know those natural systems. Even just to think right now, a very Western view of it is thinking that the wilderness is some untouched, pristine place. But in reality, the wilderness here in Canada was an ecosystem that was managed by people for thousands and thousands of years. So what we have here today was something that people were caretakers of and were stewards of. So we cannot have, say, environmental education or policies put into place without recognizing the need for Indigenous voices and creating those. And I realized that it is not my space to share these knowledges. I can speak from my own personal experience, my own family's knowledge, but we need to create space for other people's voices to share what they've learned.
And for those traditional knowledge keepers to be the one that can reteach and retrain us as settlers. I think that that's so beautiful. And again, it's why I wanted you on the podcast, because at Conscious Economics, we really do see this interconnection between building a more conscious economy and all these different pillars activating. And for me, you're activating the people pillar around the healing of people. You're activating the planet pillar around, you know, just the design of permaculture. It's also activating art, because it is an artistry. And that's what I was so taken by the first time that I saw one of your designs for Climate Solutions Park, was that it really felt like art. And it was like that little sketch that you did that ultimately would turn into an actual design of, you know, the way that we would set things up. I felt like could be framed on the wall.
Oh, thank you.
So it's just it's so special. And I, again, as I kind of step into learning more about some of these practices and opening myself up to that space, I think the big question that's always on my mind is, where do we get started if we don't come from a background like you of being born and raised in that setting, and we haven't had the same educational training? How can the average person kind of get started or learn more? Or like, is it just like having a mint plant in your kitchen? Like, what is it?
It can be. No, it definitely can be. I love that question so much, because I think that people want to be able to do these things, and they're like, wow, like this permaculture is an amazing thing to do in regenerative agriculture, but I don't live on a farm. Like, I don't even have a backyard. How can I still do these things? Right. So it's recognizing that there are tangible things that we can do. It's something as simple as having a mint plant, but even just going outside and reconnecting to nature. Mm-hmm. As simple as that sounds, when you love something and you care about something, you have a relationship with it, you're going to do things to protect it. That's just what you do for your loved ones. So just having that place and reconnecting is just so important. Another thing that I think is really important to recognize is you do not need to be in rural settings to do this. You can be in cities and urban settings. If you have a balcony, it's just about growing a couple plants outside. Or if you have a garden, it's absolutely incredible what you can do with a small amount of space. And even if you don't have that, I really recommend people to look into community gardens in their neighborhoods. If there isn't one, I think it'd be absolutely incredible to start one. There's food sharings that you can do, even just going to your local farmers markets and getting to know the people that are growing your food. There's just such a disconnection from where our food comes from, who's grown it, to then it being on our plates.
100%.
So just these simple steps really does go a long way. Yeah. We don't all need to go become farmers, anything like that, but we just need to reconnect and rebuild relationships.
Well, and I think that's why I really love the mandate of the Rural Urban Learning Association. And for anyone who doesn't know what RULA is, you can definitely check it out on the website. And Angelina's been involved with RULA for some time now. And one of the things that I do love is just breaking down this barrier between that urban and rural divide, and letting folks know that no matter where you are, there is a re-educating that can happen, and relationships are such a foundational part of that. So even just knowing who the farmers are in your local province or community, and being able to build those relationships. I never think of that as a start, but it is.
Oh, definitely.
In so many
ways.
ways.
A huge difference.
That's so cool. I love that. Hold that thought. We have a quick word from our partners before going back to the episode. This podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, RBC Investies. Backed by expert human advisors, RBC Investies is a smart, online, automated investment service that allows you to invest with low effort and low cost.
Open your first RBC Investies account and pay no management fees for your first year. Plus, start investing with as little as $100. Simply visit rbcinvesties.com/getinvesting and sign up using promo code AA407.
And now back to the episode. So in, this whole entire conversation, and we always look through the lens of the economy. And I think that our economic systems currently, as they stand right now, have really prevented many folks from connecting to nature. It was almost by design in so many ways. And I know that, if we look at income brackets, and we see like who has access to affordable food or clean or nourishing food, who has access to green spaces, you know, who has even the time in their schedule. If you have to work 3 jobs to make ends meet, then you don't have the ability to kind of have these connections. So there has been this socioeconomic layer. And one of the things that really I think moves me is when I started to do more research and really understanding the industrial farming practices and what they're really doing to our lands, our soils, but also people all around the world that are, you know, working in these systems and unjustly. So it feels very overwhelming. And I wondered with you, are you, you know, adamant about eating local? How do you counteract what is the big industrial food kind of systems, and how do we as individuals kind of stand up against that when it feels so ingrained in everything that there is?
Oh, absolutely. It's so interesting that you say that, because it's not just about the land that's being degraded. It's about the people as well. Yes. Farming is one of the largest modern day slave labors. And people don't even, like I said, there's that disconnection of what's actually happening, and going against an entire institution that's just so ingrained in our culture is very scary to do, right? And that really goes back to educating. I think it's so important just to sit down and just to take a look and to learn and to recognize what's going on, but then to not think that you can't let that fear and frustration be turned into inaction, right? So you really want that to power you forward. And I honestly believe that, like we said before, just talking to your local farmers, even growing things within what you have available to you, it's changing to not only yourself, but to the system as well. So those small steps, when they come together, it really does make a big difference.
Yeah.
So there's this idea of permaculture, and then there's also regenerative agriculture as well. And in regenerative agriculture still can happen within the industrial kind of agriculture system. So it's really important to also realize that we need to decentralize our food systems. We can't have these huge monoculture farms. And by supporting locally, by whether it be growing your food in your own neighborhoods or having a food sharing network or just buying from your local farmers, we're beginning that process of, like you said, within the economy, shifting about where that money is going. Because every single time we buy something or pay for something, it's almost like a vote. We're putting our money towards continuing that practice. So every small difference, every small dollar that you're spending actually ends up adding up to being a change.
I think that's so profound, and it's something we teach a lot, this idea of conscious consumerism and just even making these small choices. Even if you're only spending $2, like that is your $2, that is your vote.
And it makes a difference.
Yeah, it does make a difference. Now, you were talking about, you called it monoculture.
Yeah.
Can you explain what monoculture is for those of us that are just still dipping our toes into this whole space?
Absolutely. So monoculture is basically within our industrial agriculture system. Primarily farms are on large stretches of land, all industrially run through machinery. But the monoculture crops specifically are one type of plant. So
it's like a farm
like only corn or only soy or only wheat.
Okay.
Where when you're having polycultures, which is really important to permaculture, it's growing many different species, because naturally in ecosystems, if you're looking, there are thousands of different types of plants and species, and they all support one another, and they're all having that interconnected relationship. So when you wipe that all out and you only put corn, they're way less resilient. You need to use increasingly more pesticides and fertilizers. And then the more fertilizers you use, the less productive the land becomes. So you need to put even more fertilizers on top of it, or more pesticides. Because naturally our land is not meant to support only one type of crop. You really need to have those different crop species so they're naturally resilient.
Help with different bugs or insects or things. So we're relying again on these chemicals to because it just clearly, it's not the way the land wants to grow.
And they only just take out one type of nutrient in the soil. So if you're growing, say, potatoes over and over and over again, they're only going to take out one specific nutrient over and over and over again. Whereas even just going through crop rotations, then each plant takes something different from the soil and also gives back to it.
So is it true that a lot of our soil around the world is kind of destroyed right now because of this? And so when you say like we regenerate the land or we regenerate the soil, is it moving away from these mono cultures and starting to create this permaculture of
Yeah.
all these different, is that
No,
what it is?
absolutely.
Okay.
It's so interesting because there really is a difference between soil and dirt. So
Yeah.
soil is a living matter. There's thousands and thousands of microorganisms
Yeah.
within the soil,
Yeah.
right? And then there's dirt, which is basically what we're having now. It's an ecological wasteland that doesn't have any natural material or any living matter within it. And that's why you have to add everything back to the soil because itself, the soil it's dead, essentially.
Wow.
So by regenerating the soil, that's also why permaculture and regenerative practices is such an amazing climate solution, because soil is one of the largest places that we're able to store carbon.
Yeah.
So not only are we going to keep the carbon in the soil when we regenerate it, but we're actually able to sequester it out of the atmosphere
Oh, wow.
within a very short amount of time. So just by healing the soils themselves, we can take the carbon that's been released in the atmosphere and bring it back down. So which is the drawdown effect, if anybody wants to look into it.
This is so fascinating. And again, I just invite anyone who may be new to this conversation. I know some people may be well beyond, the questions that I'm asking, but I know that there's folks out there that have just felt really just like it wasn't their space, or they didn't know how to kind of insert themselves in. So I love these questions. Okay, I have a few more just burning questions. And if you can't answer them, that's okay too. But can we talk a little bit about genetic modification of food, and like
absolutely.
what does that do? Can you teach us what is happening?
Yeah,
when they're doing
absolutely.
that? Yeah.
It's so interesting because genetically modified foods, for those who don't know, it means that we are basically taking a natural species, we are then changing the actual genetics of the plant to be something. So it needs to be more resistant, more resilient. It has to be something. But what people don't realize is the argument is that we need this in order to supply food for the world because of the growing population. But that's just not true. The land is just losing its productivity. So understanding that this isn't the solution to food crisis, it's more of, like you said, the socioeconomic issues that also need to be taken into effect.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
we don't need to go into that.
Yeah.
Genetically modified food is not only unhealthy for us, but it's also unhealthy for the plant as well, because those plants they're genetically modified to be able to pick up a certain type of pesticide that's actually sprayed on them, which a lot of people don't realize, that it's in such correlation to the pesticide use and chemical use. It's not necessarily meaning that the plant itself is any better. That's why heirloom is so, so important. Heirloom seeds have been passed on from generation to generation. When a plant grows in a place, it becomes naturally resistant. It becomes acclimatized to that system.
Yeah.
Say if I took a seed that's been grown in Italy, for example, a tomato seed,
Yep.
and I planted here, it's not going to do as well because the climate's not the same, the altitude's not the same.
Right.
But if I'm growing something that has been grown on this land for generations, that plant itself is naturally going to do better. It's going to be more resistant. Farmers or gardeners have selected the best ones by hand naturally themselves.
Wow.
So every single year, that seed is going to be the most productive naturally. So buying organic and recognizing the importance of heirloom is so incredible to this whole idea, because it's really then taking the power back into community's own hands. It's not about genetically modifying all of our food in order to feed the world. It's recognizing that the land is degraded and that's why it's no longer productive. And we need to go back to these systems. We don't need to go further away from the natural way of doing things.
What
we need to actually go back to it, because plants can naturally be resistant themselves. We don't need to genetically modify them to do that.
Right. And so when we're going into a regular grocery store, if we're not, able to go to the organic section, then most of that food, almost all of it is genetically modified at this point.
Yeah. And it's really, really frustrating, because I know that organics is not available to everybody. It may not be within what they're able to afford and to spend for their families. And we shouldn't be shaming people for that. I think that it's really important, if you had to pick and choose what you want to buy, organic or not organic, there's something called the Dirty Dozen that you can look up, and it's the most sprayed plants. So if you can only buy organic for those few things that are on the list, then I recommend that people do that. We don't need to kind of change everything that we're doing. And also, it's really important just to note quickly that Organics is also certification that a lot of local farmers are not able to pay for. It makes it very difficult for them to become certified organic. Right. So even just going and talking again to those farmers, they may be doing organic and regenerative practices. They're just not able to get that certification. So just because something says that it's organic, it doesn't necessarily mean that there are other options that are not also good for you and for the land as well.
This is so fascinating. We're going to have you back because you are such a great teacher. The knowledge is really embodied in you, and it's a really beautiful thing. And I'm fascinated by this, and I'm fascinated by the interconnection. So again, guys, everyone who's watching, when we're talking about a conscious economy, it really is this intersectional connection between all these pieces: our own health of our own bodies, our food systems, the socioeconomics that prevent certain groups from being able to access these healthier items, and how it's all sort of designed that way. It's just, I think the world is really waking up to this right now. I think as we look at everything that's happening and read the newspapers every day, it is like we're watching, I guess, an undoing of something.
It really is true.
It really is. And I am grateful and staying grounded around folks like you who are holding this vision for a new way of doing and being, and are actually already exercising it. So the future's already here. For more information about Angelina and all of her incredible work, you can definitely check her out at the Rural Urban Learning Association.
Yes, absolutely.
And where else can we find you?
Yes, I am also on Instagram myself at, oh my gosh, I don't even know what it is.
We'll put
Wild One Permaculture.
Okay, Wild One Permaculture.
There's a period somewhere in there, but I will get that to you.
Okay, and we'll put it in the show notes. Yeah.
And and if you're also looking for a few other resources, definitely check out the Rural Urban Learning Association. But I also really recommend watching Kiss the Ground. I think that's an incredible film that really explains these regenerative practices a little bit further.
Okay.
And Fantastic Fungi is also a really great one to watch.
That was so cool.
Oh my gosh, it blew my mind. We share over 50% of our DNA with mushrooms, which is mind-blowing. I am an absolute mushroom fanatic, so I definitely recommend watching that as well.
So cool. Thank you for those resources, and thank you to everyone who checked out this episode. You can find out more about us at consciouseconomics.ca, and we'll see you again next week. Thanks. This podcast is brought to you by CPP Investments. At CPP Investments, they never lose sight of the long term. They invest the Canadian Pension Plan Fund to help provide financial security for generations of Canadians.
They diversify the CPP fund across geographies and asset classes to access the best investment opportunities and generate sustainable long-term returns. The fund is now more than $400 billion.
To learn more about their investment performance for Canadians, visit cppinvestments.com.